But a quick review so far is, remember, we have the Anglo-Saxon Jewett migration, right?
Yes.
I know it's Monday morning, but we got to giddy up for the learning. Yep. After that, and these are the major milestones that's leading us to the four Liberty documents, right? Yes. All right. Make sure we're on the same page here. We had the Battle of Hastings in 1066. There we have William I, also known as William the Conqueror, who comes through from Normandy, France, what we would call Normandy, France today. He is actually only the king of the Normandy Kingdom. He defeats the Anglo-Saxons, consolidates his power, but keeps most of the administrative features of the Anglo-Saxons. That's kind of where we get the shires, the sheriffs, who of course he appoints, and he who appoints becomes the king's man, right? I'm actually missing it. No, here we are, right here. William I. That's William I. He has a son, William II. He's not liked very much. Why? What is the phrase you need to remember that he is accused of that our first Liberty document is supposed to address?
My brother was evil and oppressive.
Say it again.
My brother was evil and oppressive.
What he was doing was evil and oppressive. What was he doing that the people and his brother signed? Doesn't mean he necessarily agreed with it.
Oppressive rule over taxation and corruption.
There you go. That was what was considered evil and oppressive then. Over taxation, political corruption, that's what we would call it today. And the last one, Brett?
Oppressive rule.
Oppressive rule. Through a series of unfortunate events, suspicious events, he ends up getting killed during a hunting accident. Some think that possibly his brother had something to do with it. His brother, Henry I, becomes king, and he wants to gain some favor from the barons, from the church leadership, plus he was more or less forced to do it. He agrees to 1100 Charter of Liberties, what we call the 1100 Charter of Liberties, our first Liberty document. What were the key provisions in the 1100 Charter of Liberties? Should be in your notes.
What are Charter of Liberties? Oh, they leave church alone. I got that.
Yep. No influence with the church. In other words, he doesn't get to pick the bishops. He doesn't get to pick the church leadership or tell them what to teach. What else? Critical factor.
Oh, it gives guarantees rights to the common citizen?
Not necessarily the common citizen, to the barons, to the landowners.
So it states rights.
No, not in the way that we understand it today.
Well, it's like it's stating rights for people.
Okay, now that's a much better way to say it. Establishes a rule of law that not only are the barons held to, but so is the king and his men. Keep in mind, during this time period, in fact, this is how it's been even up into the 1800s, even in this country, the tax collector was required to collect a certain amount. Anything he could shake out of you above and beyond that was his. So if you're only required to pay 10%, if he could force you any way he can to pay 15%, he got to keep the 5 additional. That's how he got paid. Not necessarily legal, but allowed. Well, part of what they are fighting against is this kind of behavior. So the king's men could also go and commit rape and murder and steal and do it under the king's name and be totally exempt from any prosecution. One of the elements in the Charter of Liberties that you need to remember is it makes everybody subject to the law equally. Now, keep in mind, the king is not voluntarily signing this document, and he doesn't really follow much of it. But it does establish the ideal of liberty in the people's minds. And when we say people, we don't mean the peasants. Probably you and I. Okay, we're talking about the landowners, the barons. Okay, there is a huge class system in this time period. So when we're talking about different liberties and such, we're not necessarily talking about the dirt farmers. Okay, it will eventually spill over to them, but not for some time yet. Anybody remember King John?
Yeah, from Robin Hood.
From Robin Hood. That's right, the Robin Hood story. Yep. And last year I played the little cartoon from, I think it's Disney that made it, about Robin Hood, and where you got, I think it's the tiger who plays King John, and he has this little song, taxes, taxes, beautiful taxes. I was going to play that, but I forgot about it. So, but he loves taxes, as most government officials do, and he sends out his sheriff to go collect taxes. Okay, and the story goes with the Robin Hood story is that Robin Hood, not the Disney version, anti-capitalist version, but the original version is he would go and take the money, because the sheriff would come into a town, collect all the gold, silver, whatever of value, and then he'd go on down to the next town. Well, Robin Hood would go and catch him on the road, took it from. Okay, the Disney story is he took from the rich, gave to the poor. Not true. He took what was already theirs. He took what was stolen from them and gave it back to them. That's the essence of the Robin Hood story. Now, during this time period, King John also wants to interfere with the church. He wants to appoint his own bishops. Remember, at this time it's still the Roman Catholic Church. Archbishop Stephen Langton knows his history. And he pulls out the 1100 Charter of Liberties and reminds the barons, what are you doing letting him dictate to you like this? You have English rights. You have rights that you have inherited. And the king has agreed to this. When one king signs a document, he is committing all other kings after him to that commitment. Just like governments today. When a government signs a treaty, let's say the President of the United States negotiates a treaty and the Senate confirms that treaty, they have committed all other presidents after that, all other senates, all the American people after that to that treaty. For example, if Japan is ever attacked by China, we signed an agreement after we defeated Japan in World War II that in exchange of them never having a military again, we will provide their defense. That's why watching China and doing what they're doing in the South China Sea is very concerning to us. China and Japan do not get along. They've been enemies for centuries, maybe even thousands of years. If something happens, we will have to go to the defense of Japan. Same thing with the Western powers in Europe. The NATO alliance guarantees our intervention if Russia gets aggressive and comes into Western Europe. It was looking like we might have to do that when they invaded the Ukraine. There's a section in Ukraine Russia took over, and same thing in the Crimean down in the southern area over by the Black Sea. They invaded and what's called annexed, took over again. That could have easily triggered us in a response. That's why we still have troops over there, is to help deter Russia's aggression. That's how we got into the Korean War. It's how we got into the Vietnam War. We had agreements that even though we may not want to go, we had an agreement and we were committed to go. Yes, that's why you didn't have the big uproar that the Ukraine had. Yeah, most Ukrainians did not want to be part of Russia again. Remember, millions of Ukrainians were starved to death in the mid-1900s because of Russia. So there's no love there at all. So.
Well, the problem is after all those Ukrainians starved, guess who moved in?
Russia.
Russians.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's why the whole eastern half is.
Yep. So the Archbishop says you have certain rights. Exercise them. reinforced them. That leads us to Magna Carta 1215, where at sword point, King John agrees to a list of rights, particularly in writing. What were the three main elements that we still use today? It's not that we don't use the others. Some of them are just no longer valid because of our system's a little different. But there are three provisions in particular that we still get today, that we still enjoy as part of our inheritance of being members of the Western civilization heritage.
Taxes can only be levied by the Parliament. Martial law may not be imposed in time of peace. Prisoners must be able to challenge their
Detentions, yep. So you get representative government. At this time, it's called parliament. Parliamentary government. That's the same thing as representative government. We don't have a parliamentary system here, so we don't use that term. But in political philosophy, it is called parliamentary government. Representative government for the first time. That establishes the British Parliament. The second is no taxation without representation. That representation comes from where? Parliament. That's right. And the third is due process. You might get arrested, you could get arrested, but there is a process of which the court system had to operate. Prior to this time, they could arrest you for any reason. They don't like what you're wearing today. You can go to prison, and you didn't even know why. No trial, nothing. No way to challenge it. Couldn't see the evidence. Couldn't challenge the evidence, even if you did see it. There was no system for you to get what we'd call today a fair trial. Those are the three primary. I think there may be a couple others, but those are the three primary I want you to remember for this class.